Have you ever stopped to think about why we aren't, wading knee-deep in squirrels or something? Seriously, what is it that stops any one species from just taking over the entire planet? Well, it turns out nature has a whole playbook for keeping populations in check, and we're going to dive right into it.
And it all kicks off with a really strange puzzle. Meet Hydrilla. Now, back in its home turf in Asia, this plant is totally fine, just another part of the ecosystem. But when it got to the United States, it went absolutely bonkers. We're talking choking out entire lakes, growing completely out of control. It's the exact same plant, so what gives?
So we've got ourselves a runaway population puzzle. And stick with me, because by the time we're done here, you'll have all the pieces you need to solve it, using some really cool ecological ideas.
The big clue is that something's obviously missing from Hydrilla's new American home, something that was acting like a brake on it back in Asia. But what could that be? Well, the answer has a name: limiting factors.
Yeah, just think of them as nature's natural brakes. Every single ecosystem has them, and they are the reason populations don't just shoot up to infinity. They're what really decides how many critters or plants an environment can actually handle.
So, in simple terms, a limiting factor is just anything that limits a population's growth. And they generally fall into two big categories. Some of them, like predators, really depend on how crowded a population gets, and others, like a hurricane, couldn't care less.
Okay, let's break that down. On one hand, you've got your density-dependent factors. These guys really kick into high gear when a population gets big and crowded. Stuff like competition for food or how easily a disease can spread in a packed area. On the other hand, you've got density-independent factors. A wildfire or a flood, for instance, can crush a population no matter how big or small it was to begin with. We're going to look at both.
So first up, let's talk about that first category, the factors that really start to bite when things get a little too cozy.
And these are the heavy hitters. You've got competition, predation, things eating plants, parasites and disease, and even just the sheer stress of being overcrowded. To see how this all works in the real world, we're going to look at a classic, long-running drama, the story of the wolves and moose of Isle Royale. So welcome to Isle Royale. It's this isolated island up in Lake Superior, where for decades scientists have been watching this incredible dance between wolves and moose. This graph shows it all. It's the perfect example of that predator-prey relationship in action.
Let's trace the cycle on the graph. See, right here, around 75, the wolf population, that's the blue line, it starts to climb. And with more predators on the hunt, they take down more moose. So what happens? The moose population, the red line, starts to drop. More wolves, fewer moose. Makes sense, right?
But wait, look what happens right after. As their main food source, the moose, gets harder to find, the wolves start to starve, their population plummets, and with fewer predators running around, well, the moose population gets a chance to recover, and the whole cycle is set to start all over again.
But then, around 1980, the story takes a sharp turn. See that insane drop in the wolf population? That wasn't just about food scarcity. A new player entered the game: disease. A virus accidentally brought to the island just ripped through the wolf packs.
So, with their number one predator basically gone, the moose population was free. No checks, no balances, and it just exploded, hitting a crazy peak of almost 2,400 moose on this one little island.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. That super high density of moose created the absolute perfect storm for another limiting factor: parasites. The crowded conditions meant winter ticks had a field day, infesting the moose, weakening them, and causing their population to crash. Again. You see how it's all a chain reaction?
Okay, so that's what happens when population density is the name of the game. But what about those other forces? Let's switch gears and look at the things that can hit a population no matter how big or small it is.
Yeah, we're talking about the big, dramatic stuff. Hurricanes, droughts, floods, wildfires. These are events that can just randomly wipe out a huge chunk of a population. A hurricane doesn't care how many animals are in its path. It just hits.
So, it might seem like you have these two neat, separate boxes, right? But come on, this is nature we're talking about. It loves to get messy. Is that line between these two types of factors always so solid?
Let's go back to Isle Royale one last time. So the wolves have crashed, the moose population is through the roof, and then a totally random, density-independent event happens. A monster winter with tons of snow. And that snow buried the plants the moose need to eat to survive. And here is the crucial bit. That bad weather was way more devastating because the moose population was so massive. With 2,400 moose all scrambling for the tiny bit of food that wasn't buried, there just wasn't enough to go around. A lot of them weakened and died. Now, if the population had been small, that same bad winter wouldn't have been nearly as big a deal. See, the independent event was made worse by the dependent one.
Okay, so now we have all the clues. We get how things like predators and disease work, and how random events like weather play a part. We are totally ready to go back and crack our original case.
So let's solve it. Why did hydrilla go nuts in the US? Because all the density-dependent things that kept it in line back in Asia, the specific insects that ate it, the fish, the diseases, they didn't come along for the ride. Without its natural enemies, its population growth had no brakes.
So how do you fix a problem like that? Well, you have to reintroduce a break. Scientists looked for a natural predator, and they found one, a fish called the grass carp, which just loves to eat hydrilla. By carefully introducing this herbivore, they could finally put a check on the plant's runaway growth.
And that brings us to one last thought for you. The official rule is that you can only use sterilized grass carp. Now that you understand how limiting factors and runaway populations work, think about it for a second. Why is that rule so incredibly important? What bigger problem are they trying to avoid creating all over again?